So unless you're hiding under a rock, you know what's been happening daily in all the news media about race. It's been a big issue for a long time. It's probably going to still continue to be a big issue for a long time. But one of my old associates and colleagues you see sitting next to me now is Max Du Preez. And Max, I just want to bring to other people's attention a little bit of your history, because a lot of people tend to think that because you're Du Preez, Afrikaans, wrote for Afrikaans media, that you are obviously right-wing, and that's where you sit. Just tell us, for the people who are younger than us, tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, I am. I'm, as they call it, I'm from the perpetrator class, middle-aged white Afrikaner male. I started my work. I started working in journalism at Die Burger in Cape Town in 1975, and then quickly, my I was born in the Free State of a very conservative Christian nationalist Afrikaner family. And it took me a year or two of journalism to open my eyes to what was really going on in the society. And so eventually I left Afrikaans newspapers because I just couldn't work for them anymore. And I told them so. And I went to work. I was the political editor of the Financial Mail, of the Sunday Times, and of Business Day. But it wasn't all that different. I felt that especially the Sunday Times was just more polite about apartheid than the Afrikaans newspapers. Anyway, so my big friend, old friend from university days was Van Zyl Slabbert. He was in Parliament, and I was in Parliament for Business Day in the 80s. And he came to me with this idea of why the country is in a deep mess, and people old enough will remember 86 was a tumultuous year. And he was planning to leave Parliament and then take people, Afrikaans-speaking people, mostly white people, to meet with the ANC leadership. Then still banned, it was still a crime, you can't quote them. And so we went on the safari to Dakar in Senegal, which was very controversial at the time, and P.W. Botha threatened to lock us up, and we had to be protected from the AWB. But we had a meeting with the leadership of the ANC in Senegal in July of 1986. And Van Zyl's idea, Van Zyl and Alex Borain and Breyten Breitenbach were the sort of main organizers. The idea was to do something symbolic, to stimulate the concept of negotiations politics, because this was a war that wasn't going to be won. South African Defence Force and security police were not going to win it. And Mkhonto weSizwe wasn't either. So we were just consuming ourselves. And the idea was, let's do this, show white South Africans that the ANC aren't devils with horns, and show black South Africans in the ANC that you can actually talk to these Boere. And while I was there, I was sitting in we also went on a trip to meet President Thomas Sankara of Burkina Faso and Jerry Rawlings of Ghana and so on. And I was sitting in the garden next to the pool of the Intercontinental Hotel in Ouagadougou in Burkina Faso with Wembeyes Naudé, Abraham Viljoen, twin brother of Constant, Van Zyl Slabbert, Breyten Breitenbach. And I was bemoaning the fact, because we just got faxes before emails. I remember this is 86. We just got faxes of how our visit to Dakar had been portrayed in the South African media, especially the Afrikaans media. You know, we were aiding and abetting the communists, we were traitors, we were undermining the struggle against terrorism and stuff. And so Wembeyes Naudé looked me in the eye and he said, I don't like people who moan and don't do anything. If that's how you feel, why don't you launch a proper Afrikaans-speaking newspaper that would speak the truth about apartheid? And so there it started, and I launched the next year a newspaper called Vrye Weekblad, which was unashamedly anti-apartheid. For instance, we were the people who exposed the Vlakplaas death squads, the Civil Cooperation Bureau of the Defense Force, Directorate COVID Collection, all these clandestine killing commandos of the apartheid regime. So that was my background, and we ran for 6 years, and then the government tried to close us down by just persecuting me. I was in court 17 times in 2 years. I have a very long criminal record as I sit here before you, which the present regime don't want to expunge, by the way. So whenever I travel, I have to say I have convictions in terms of the Terrorism Act and the Internal Safety Act and so on and so on. So one of these court cases was with a guy called General Lothar Neethling, who was truly the Dr. Mengele of apartheid. He was a brilliant scientist, pharmacist, and he prepared toxins and all kinds of muti to use on anti-apartheid activists, to inject it in their wine, to give them sort of fake heart attacks, or to just drug them so they could be abducted. So we exposed him by name. He sued us. We won the defamation case. It lasted 4 years. It cost us everything we had. And then on appeal to the appellate division, they said, well, we don't know who's speaking the truth. So you pay. So I had to pay the legal costs, which were millions, which meant my company was bankrupt. So that was it. And in February of 1994, we closed Vrye Weekblad. I then joined the SABC because the SABC was then the new SABC with Zulaki Sisulu at the top. And I ran for 2.5 years the weekly documentary series on the Truth Commission called the TRC Special Report, which is very popular. I started things like Special Assignment. But inevitably, as is my lot in life, I was being too independent for the SABC, and in 1999 I was kicked out for not respecting the leadership. And that's my journalism career, so it's mostly built on I was fired more than anybody else.
You really were, and with a longer criminal record, I suspect, than many others. What I don't know is what happened with you being born in the Free State that made you think unlike your neighbors were thinking? Yeah,
very good question, because, I mean, when I did the Truth Commission, when we filmed all these perpetrators, the soldiers and the policemen, I sat there week after week and I looked in these guys' face, and they were guilty of murder and kidnapping and torture. And I looked at them, they looked like me, they have my background. Some of them were called Du Preez. And I've confronted this question, so what made me different? What I can say to you, Stuart, is that I am not inherently more noble than them. What happened to me was journalism. I was privileged to be a young journalist. I became a journalist at the age of 22 to see things that I could not ignore. My first big job in journalism was 16th of June, 1976, when I saw young black people, some of them just 4 years or so younger than me, or 3 years younger than me, walking into the police, walking into a barrage of bullets. And I was shocked to my core, because in my comfortable environment, there was not such anger, no such anger. I was a happy guy. I'd just been to university. I have a nice girlfriend. I have a nice, interesting job. I live in a nice flat. And suddenly the shock of seeing the real South Africa. So those are the kind of things that happened. Later I went to Parliament, and I saw the moral bankruptcy of the Afrikaner nationalist leadership. So and as my eyes opened, I opened my heart and started speaking to people and started befriending people from the ANC. I did a stint, for instance, in Namibia with the transition to independence. So I became social friends with many SWAPO leaders and MPLA leaders, just on a social level. And the same happened in South Africa. I sort of had a couple of mates who happened to be in the ANC, but the ANC happened to be illegal. So it's journalism. The realities of South Africa hit me. And in that sense, I was privileged because I look at people like me, friends, family. They didn't have that opportunity. They went straight into the system. They became dominees or business people or whatever. And I had that. And that's why till today, I think that is a privilege as an Afrikaner to have experienced all those things and to be forced to be an agent for change, to confront apartheid. And that's what I'm still doing. I relaunched Vrye Weekblad as an online newspaper that appears every Friday called vryeweekblad.com. And it's virtually the only progressive Afrikaans voice in South Africa. Progressive in the political, but also in the social and cultural sense.
I need to know one more thing before we move to what's happened in the last week. What were your parents like? Were they typically conservative, living in the Free State? I mean, parents have an influence on all of us. So Sorry, I've just got a cup of tea coming in. Leah, bring my tea, please. Sorry. I thought somebody was coming in to ask me thank you very much, some very thing. Your parents, what?
Yeah.
Tell me.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Because, we are products of our families. My parents were very conservative, Afrikaner nationalist, very Christian, very strict. And I'm sure my father was a member of the Broederbond and so on. So my parents were very upset when I started Vrye Weekblad, and I didn't speak to them for many years because they were under pressure in their own community because your son is a communist and a terrorist and he betrays Afrikaners and so on. So we did make peace. I made peace with my father a few days before he died at the age of 80, some 20 years ago. But that's not the entire story. It's easy to say, well, my parents brought me up as a racist and my father, who was a fairly distant person, but he had a fundamental sense of justice. And I remember little snippets through my youth of where my father stood up for the underdog. And in some cases, those underdogs were black people who were discriminated against. I write in my memoirs about a scene that I remember when I was about 9. My father was our community church's liaison with the black minister. Our congregation funded them. So every month he had to come and bring the books and get the money, and my father was running the administration. And he used to come in the front door, walk out in front of everybody. And so the Afrikaners, I'm talking about the early 1960s now. And so I remember the community, the white Afrikaner community, sent someone to come and talk to my father about this. I was sitting there. And they said, well, what is it with this black man who you greet with your hand, and he comes in your front door and you drink coffee with him on your front stoop in front of everybody? And my father was so angry, I remember, and he said, now, do you think this Moruti, this minister, do you think he works for God? And the guy said, of course he does. And my father leaned forward and he said, so you want me to send a messenger of God, a man who works for God, back to the kitchen and say, come in the back door, and you're not good enough to drink from the same cups as I do. And this guy was saying, well, it's not actually what I meant. And he said, no, that's what you mean. And no, all of us here and you will remember little snippets of what happened in your life. And that thing happened. I was so proud of my father. He was shunned afterwards. He was a bit of an outcast after that. But so my father did have a sense of justice.
Morality, yeah.
My father had another thing that influenced me. My father grew up extremely poor because his father was a prisoner of war in Ceylon. His mother was a survivor of the concentration camps. And so he grew up as what they called at the time a poor white. He was about 25 when he made matric, because his father died in the flu of 1919, by the way. His father died a few months before he was born. And so he grew up on the periphery of society, and most of the people he came into contact with were black people. So my father always spoke a very good and pure Sesotho and loved the language and loved the culture. And so my father used to tell me stories about Morena Moshweshwe, who in his eyes was an absolute hero, the king of the Basotho. And this was odd because, this was unusual. So I inherited that. And when I grew up, I took this fascination with King Moshweshwe further. I made a film about him. I've written many books about him. I've written a separate book about him and his mentor, a man with the name of Mohlomi. So those are the influences in your life, and in that sense, I'm blessed.
It's so interesting because we'll get to the topic right now. But I grew up in what was Rhodesia, southern Rhodesia, then Rhodesia, and apartheid wasn't formalized, but there's no question that it existed. And I just think back when I came back to South Africa to live, it was to start a radio station, Capital Radio, to start a radio station that would talk to all South Africans as equals. And I just felt it so strongly. And yet I'd grown up in a place where I don't think we ever had such discussions in my home. It was just something that, you had, it's what you lived with. But I think whatever's in your heart is going to be there. And you can't silence it. And I think that's what's happened with you now in the last couple of weeks. So not even that. So there was an incident in cricket, and this really got your goat. Tell us what happened.
Well, there's this whole Black Lives Matter thing that has been sweeping the world after the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis. And it's an extraordinary thing. You have parliamentarians in Western parliaments taking the knee, pledging loyalty to Black Lives Matter. You have European, British soccer players playing with Black Lives Matter. Cricket players, the cricket players now, West Indies and England, took a knee before they started. They have Black Lives Matter on their shirts. So it is a huge movement. Say, enough already. It was one incident, but can we create a new consciousness about the position that black-skinned people in the world are in? And let's turn this around. Okay, so South Africa wasn't going to be spared this because we're part of the world. And Lungi and Gidi, one of the most exciting young bowlers in our national team, made a statement saying he wants to bring this to the Proteas. He wants the Proteas to embrace this concept. And so two ex-cricketers, former cricketers, Boeta Dippenaar and Pat Simcox, then attacked him and said, what is this? This is a communist thing. Why don't you rather campaign against farm murders and we will never be a part of that. And I thought that was either so uninformed or it was really racist, because Black Lives Matter as an organization is tiny. It started in 2013 by 3 young Black African-American women. But what we're talking about now is an international movement. So to go back and say, in 2013, one of these women said, yeah, we kind of like Marxism. That makes this whole movement. So Lewis Hamilton and all these people, all these international sports stars are now communists. That was so stupid to me. And I said, guys, cricket South Africa and also rugby South Africa and football South Africa, we will have to embrace this like other people have done. So where do you stand, guys? Where do you stand? And I named them. I said, Graham, Faf, AB, Ratsi van der Dussen, Mark Boucher, where do you guys stand on this? Do you side with these people who criticize Lungi and Gidi? Or do you recognize this movement for what it is? And I had hate mail like you haven't seen before. And then, interestingly, yesterday...
From the people whose names you mentioned or others?
Pardon?
From the people whose names you mentioned or from observers?
Oh, no, from everybody. No, from on Twitter and on Facebook, just vitriol, you know, the old things that they used to say about me that, you know, can't be repeated here. But interestingly, yesterday morning, Rassie van der Dussen sent me a tweet in Afrikaans, and he said, for your information, I support Black Lives Matter. I am against all murders and all violations of human rights, and the fact that I support and embrace Black Lives Matter does not mean I am a Marxist or I hate anybody. And I thought that was a very powerful thing, and he on purpose did it in Afrikaans. And now we've seen Andrich Norkeer has come out and publicly done it. So we're beginning to see white cricketers stand up and say, yes, we want to be a part of this movement. Because the other thing that this has done is it unleashed the emotions of so many black and colored cricketers who now tell, in the last few days, tell the stories of how they had been treated, how they felt as black and colored cricketers. So it is a very important thing for white cricketers to stand up and embrace this. It's not, you know, what Pat Simcox said was, it's not Black Lives Matter, it's all lives matter. And I don't know if Pat is a bit slow or he doesn't read very widely, but the thing about all lives matter, Black Lives Matter does not say that white lives don't matter. Black lives say, we know that white lives matter in the world of the last few hundred years. Can we add black lives to that now? And that's what all lives matter mean. It does not, Black Lives Matter mean. So when you start shouting, all lives matter, you actually deny the striving for really let's all lives matter.
I think yesterday, was it, that I saw something like 29 unions, cricket unions have signed some kind of a charter or something. Am I right?
Yeah, I think that movement is now on the way. And it's a pity they had to be prodded. Why didn't they come? I'm still waiting for Graham Smith, Director of Cricket. All he said so far is, we're sympathetic to Black Lives Matter. We could not put it on our shirts because the shirts had already been printed. And I said to him, reprint them. This is a week ago. Reprint them. It's only a few dozen.
You know, it's so interesting.
The cop-out.
Yeah, it is a cop-out. And the reality is that silence speaks such volumes. And, you know, yeah. I look around me and there are people I can't associate with because I know what goes on in their minds. And I don't know how we're ever going to get past it. My grandchildren now, their best mates are all different colors. They seem completely unaware. Is it only time that will help and heal?
No, it's activism. No, we have to do what you and I are doing now. We have to stir the pot all the time, especially us pale-skinned people. We have to stir in our own communities and eradicate racism there and educate people, because sometimes I see someone or I hear someone say something and I think, what a damn racist are you? And then I talk to the guy and it's actually, it's not pure racism, it's ignorance in words used. And so we need to play that kind of role. We need to work in our own communities. But there's another part of Black Lives Matter that we should not neglect in South Africa. And that is not the international movement, but South Africa. Can Black lives start mattering in South Africa, please? And when we're talking about that, we're talking about Collins Khoza, who was killed by the police in Alexandra. The black guy in Cape Town who was ripped out of his bath and paraded out naked. The people who live in hellholes of squatter camps. Those black lives should also matter. So and it's all of our problem, but we should also look at our government and say, you who parade as the champions of the masses, the black masses and the unemployed and the working class, we want to hold you to higher standards and say, how come black lives don't matter so much to you?
Max, thank you so much for bringing this to our attention once again, and may you continue to do it. And just watch your back, be safe, because listen, you've been on so many hit lists and had so many threats for so long. But I just think that, you know, when you know it's right, it just makes it a lot easier, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think my philosophy is every single human life has the same value. And I will live like that. And I am too simple a man to bullshit people and lie. I have found in my long life that the easiest way to get through life is just to speak your mind and be honest. And it hasn't brought me a lot of fame and wealth, but I'm kind of at peace with myself. It's easier to just be straightforward and say, this is my philosophy, and I'm going to tell you this, even if you don't like it. And I think the time for Afrikaners like me to be activists for change and reconciliation is not over.
Thank you. You know, and also what I found is, you know, as we do get older, even if I tell a small white lie, I battle to remember it. So I think it's a lot easier, to be honest.
I think as early dementia is going to set in, it'll be easier to tell lies because you won't know.
Wonderful. Great to catch up again, Max. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.